everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. All right. My guest today is Ambassador Dinkar Srivastava. He has worked in the Indian missions in Washington, Brussels, Tripoli, Malta, Prague, and Tehran. He served in the Indian Consul General in Karachi. He negotiated India's participation in the Chabad port development. Post retirement, he served on the board of directors of GAIL as well as India Ports Global Limited for development of the Chabad port. He has extensively dealt with the Jammu and Kashmir situation in the United Nations and other international forums. He was a member of the Indian delegation to the World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna and the International Court of Justice in the case of shooting down of the Pakistani spy plane Atlantic. He's one of the co-authors of the Comprehensive Convention Against Terrorism. He coordinated the VIF Task Force on India's energy transition in a carbon-constrained world. But today we are not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Ambassador Dinkar's book, Forgotten Kashmir. And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome him. Sir, पॉडकास्ट पे आने के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद.
Thank you. Thanks for a very generous introduction.
So, sir, my first question, I always have this tradition on the podcast that whenever we discuss a book on the podcast, my first question is, sir, why this book and why this specific topic?
I dealt with Kashmir issue for 8 years in the 90s, and we had to face Pakistani resolutions repeatedly in General Assembly and the Commission on Human Rights. And we found that the narrative was distorted because it only focused on the Indian side of the line of control. Nothing was known about the other side, and this was not an accident. So I have tried to fill the gap, and I have tried to do this based on Pakistani sources so that the facts cannot be disputed even by the other side.
So, sir, actually, let's talk a little bit about because this is the one bit I remember even in the introduction of the book, you specifically mention about this, that all the references and the source material is through Pakistani sources primarily in this book. Now, how tough was it to, even from an point of view of accessing those sources? Were there any roadblocks when you would try to gather those sources or of any kind? Would they make sure that they don't let you access some of the things they don't want you to access?
This is a very important question. I imposed on myself a very difficult standard, that is using Pakistani sources. I had one advantage, having served in Pakistan and knowing Urdu. And I have gone through many of the first-hand account of people who shape Pakistan's Kashmir policy. So these are now in public domain, fortunately. I also had accessed a lot of material, especially debate in Pakistan National Assembly on Shimla Agreement, for instance, in the Library of Congress. And I accessed the UN Library in New York because obviously, as an Indian diplomat, I would never be allowed in POK. So this has helped me. And some of the major sources, Akbar Khan, he is the man who planned the tribal invasion and led it. He, as a serving officer of the Pakistan Army, later became military advisor to Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan. There's Qudratullah Shahab, ICS. He is a very famous figure in Pakistan. As government of Pakistan issued a stamp in his name. He headed presidential secretariat for 11 years. Then there is Muhammad Yusuf Sarraf, who has played a very major role in POK's formation because he was a Muslim conference leader, and the Muslim conference had initially decided, working committee had decided to, had supported Kashmir's independence under Maharaja. It was Yusuf Sarraf who got it reversed in favor of Pakistan. So he has played a very major role in Pakistan's favor, and therefore he has an insider's account. and he has written a 2-book history of what went on in POK, which I have very extensively used. And last but not the least, I've used the judgments of Pakistan Supreme Court. I have used the POK Constitution, 13 Amendments, Gilgit-Baltistan Order. These are all government documents. They are available in public domain, and some of them, I had to access. I had some difficulty in access, but I got it.
Sir, just out of curiosity, why do you think in the discussion, and when I mean the discussion, I'm not stating the discussion from the Pakistani perspective. I'm talking about the eyeballs that we catch in India, and the words that come out of our mouth in India. Even for us, why do you think that a book like yours, because like I consider myself to be someone who actually does try to read as much as possible, but I barely find people actually having a razor sharp focus on POK. And every there are books after books on the Kashmir, controlled by India and administered by India, and nobody talks about POK. And books बहुत कम है, articles बहुत कम है, intellectual discussions बहुत कम है. What could be the possible reasons for that, sir?
Partly it's Pakistan's policy of censorship. POK is called the last colony. So even Pakistanis are not easily allowed, and this was used as springboard for terrorism. So obviously Pakistan had a reason to keep it under the curtain. And this is one reason. The other is, of course, that most of the writers on Kashmir find it easier to write on the basis of Indian sources, which unfortunately cover only one part, but that is the easy part, and that has created a dissonance or gap. So an impression is created that the problem is on the Indian side, because that's the only thing which comes out in international press. People do not know what has gone on and on the other side of the line of control, which is what my book brings out.
Sir, Abhi, let's get straight into the book. We can maybe let's talk about a little bit of the early history. So, as you had shared the presentation with me, I also will bring up the map now as we talk about the early history. जैसे आपने बताया था. So I'll hand it over to you now, sir.
You have a look at the map. The purple part, it's like the northwest corner of Kashmir. This is what is called northern area. It looks like the lion's head, and there's a thin sliver of territory running north-south opposite Jammu region of India, the lower reaches, and that is the what Pakistan calls Azad Kashmir. Or we call the entire area shown in purple here as POK. Now, what is the difference in terminology? Pakistan has separated northern area, which is 85% of the territory under its legal control, right in the beginning. And this was a violation of the UN Security Council resolutions, which was brought out much later in 1993 in a historic judgment of the POK High Court. And the POK High Court described this, the secession or separation of northern areas from Azad Kashmir or POK by Pakistan as a violation of Security Council resolutions by Pakistan. Now, let me describe the strategic importance of the northern area. Without Pakistani control on northern area, there would have been no CPEC, because northern area has given Pakistan geographical contiguity with China. Conversely, we lost geographical contiguity with Afghanistan and Central Asia once northern area was occupied by Pakistan. Now, there are different views when Pakistan took over northern area away from POK. The current view is based on what is called Karachi Agreement. This was an agreement signed in 1949 by between Pakistan government, which was represented by Nawab Burmani. He was the Minister for Kashmir Affairs. On the POK side, there were two representatives, Sardar Ibrahim, the first president of POK, and Chaudhry Ghulam Abbas, the chairman of Muslim Conference. Now, this agreement, as I mentioned, was kept secret by Pakistan. Why? Because Pakistan had changed the territorial status quo without plebiscite, which was a violation of Security Council resolution. Now, there is a caveat to this, and there are, in fact, two caveats. This is, in the 90s, I saw an American movie, and the hero is caught by his second wife flirting with his third girlfriend. And when confronted, he denies whatever the wife was saying. And he uses a delicate phrase, about a version of truth. And the wife retorts, there's no version of truth. Truth is only one. So Karachi Agreement is one version of truth. What is the truth? And for that, let's go back to the primary source. This is Major Brown's account of what happened in northern area. He headed Gilgit Scouts, which was a militia under Maharaja's government, and he raised the flag of revolt on 1st November 1947 against the Maharaja. Now, never before or after, anywhere in the annals of history, freedom struggle has been carried out by representative of a colonial power. So obviously there were other forces at play, and he was not a lone ranger. He has written in his memoirs that after taking over northern area, he asked Northwest Frontier Province to send a representative to take over control of this territory. Gilgit Scouts were headquartered in Northwest Frontier Province in undivided India. And that representative was a man called Muhammad Alam, a Tehsildar of Northwest Frontier Province, who came and took over control of northern area from Major Brown on 17th November. Now, this is all in his memoirs called Coup d'etat, which is a very apt description of what happened. It was not an indigenous struggle. Now, the issue is, why was northern area not handed over to provisional government of POK, which had been formed earlier on 24th October? Why was it handed over to a representative of Northwest Frontier Province, which was part of Pakistan? So obviously Pakistan took over control of northern area way back in November 47 itself. This gives light to the later theory which has been, basically brought out to whitewash this part of history. Now there's another twist to this tale of Karachi Agreement. There are many, versions of Pakistan has many versions of truth. So a key signatory of Karachi Agreement who represented Kashmiri or POK people was Sardar Ibrahim, the first president of POK. He was an accidental president, a minor functionary of Muslim Conference. The senior leader was Ghulam Abbas, who was in prison in Srinagar. So this chap got a chance. Now in his later life, Sardar Ibrahim went on saying, मैंने जिंदगी में और भी गलतियां की हैं, ये गलती नहीं की है. I have committed other mistakes in my life. I have not committed this mistake. So he completely denied ever having signed Karachi Agreement, which raises the question that to begin with, it was a forged document to rationalize Pakistan's control, which took place in way back in 47 itself. And Chaudhry Ghulam Abbas, the other signatory of the so-called Karachi Agreement, has also distanced himself. He said that he was only party chairman, and as party chairman, his job was advocacy of Kashmir cause, and therefore he had nothing to do with the secession of territory. So that whole episode, that is separating 85% of POK from and taking over for direct administration by Pakistan was a violation of Security Council resolution, and agreement itself is most probably a forced document.
Fair enough. But then, sir, there is a lot of talk about plebiscites. प्लेबिसाइट होना चाहिए, प्लेबिसाइट होना चाहिए, भारत प्लेबिसाइट नहीं करने देता है. So what is the reality when it comes to the whole plebiscite scenario?
Let me take you to the POK part, which is where the fighting took place. There's a lower region because there were no Pakistani forces in northern area, and Pakistan denied in Security Council having committed troops in POK. It was called tribal invasion. Sir, Colonel Akbar Khan, who planned the tribal invasion, he has described that the invasion was planned and approved in a meeting by Liaquat Ali Khan, Pakistan's Prime Minister. In fact, he has described 4 such meetings. And there's a very interesting episode with Sarraf recounts. He recounts his discussion with Sardar Ibrahim, who said that he announced formation of provisional government on the basis of 2 phone calls received from Rawalpindi. Why Rawalpindi, not Karachi? Karachi was the national capital because Rawalpindi, then as now, was Pakistan Army headquarters. And who were these callers? One was Khwaja Rahim, Rawalpindi commissioner, and the second was Begum Naseem, the wife of the military adventurer Colonel Akbar, the then wife of Colonel Akbar Khan, who was by then already inside Kashmir leading the tribal invasion. So this is the part of the invasion story. Now let's come to the plebiscite. India took the issue to United Nations on 1st January 1948. UN formed UN Commission on India and Pakistan, UNCIP, which came to India and Pakistan and adopted a resolution in August 48, which had 3 parts: ceasefire, withdrawal of all Pakistani forces. India was asked to withdraw only bulk of its forces, and this was a major difference, which is the closest UN came to acknowledging that India had a legal claim. Pakistan had none, and that's why Pakistan was to withdraw all its forces. And the third part was plebiscite, which was, in this chronology, it came after withdrawal of Pakistani forces. Pakistan never withdrew, so plebiscite did not take place. Now, this part of the story is available in public domain. What is not was known, which my book has brought out, there have been, contrary to the public impression that India went back on plebiscite, it's Pakistan which went back on plebiscite. There have been only 3 formal occasions when plebiscite was offered. And on all 3 occasions, India was willing to consider it, Pakistan rejected it. The first such occasion arose on 2nd November 1947 when Mountbatten went to Lahore to meet Jinnah and proposed plebiscite under UN's auspices, exactly what has since become Pakistan's official position. And Jinnah refused it. Now, this account is given by Alan Campbell Johnson, Mountbatten's aide, in his memoirs, Mission with Mountbatten. Why Jinnah refused? Because tribal invasion was going on, and tribals had killed, raped, and looted Hindus, Muslims, and Christians without discrimination. So Jinnah knew that Pakistan will lose the vote, so he turned down what became subsequently Pakistan's official position, that is plebiscite under UN's auspices. Second such occasion arose in 1950. UN appointed a mediator, Owen Dixon, who came to India and Pakistan and proposed regional plebiscite. He said a single plebiscite across the entire state would leave pockets of minorities on either side of political divide and lead to forced migration, which was already happening on a much larger scale across the subcontinent. So to avoid it, he suggested regional plebiscite and limited the scope to the valley because he said in other areas, given the composition of the population, it was known which way they'll go. valley, the contention was in the valley because 70% of the population were Muslim, but the leading political organization, National Conference, was aligned with India. Now, Pakistan should have jumped at it because if you go by its theory, Muslims of Kashmir wanted to join Pakistan. Owen Dixon has recorded that India was willing to consider it. Pakistan turned it down. And Pakistan said that regional plebiscite was a departure from the principle of single plebiscite. Now, in the same paragraph, next sentence, Owen is very critical. Owen Dixon has reported to the UN, but I'm, however, given the impression that Pakistan is willing to accept partition of the state provided it got the valley. So Pakistan was willing to abdicate the principle of single plebiscite provided it got the valley, and it got the valley without a vote. So single plebiscite was simply an excuse, a pretext. Now comes the third and the most critical part. 1953 August, Sheikh Abdullah was dismissed and arrested. India is supposed to have lost the Abdullah card. And as people like Mr. A.G. Nurani keep saying that, after that, Nehru developed cold feet. Pakistan proposed bilateral talks. India accepted it. Pakistani Prime Minister Muhammad Ali Bogra came to Delhi. Bogra-Nehru communique was issued, which is in public domain. It committed both countries to plebiscite. Muhammad Ali Bogra went back, and on 1st December 1953, he wrote an official letter to Prime Minister Nehru rejecting plebiscite, which he had agreed 3 months earlier in Delhi. Now, this essentially killed the proposal because plebiscite is a bilateral choice between two countries. It cannot be held unilaterally. And this is 4 months before Nehru rejected plebiscite. This was, in April 1954. Nehru said that, Pakistan has joined Seato Cinto and therefore situation has changed. But by that, he was essentially flogging a dead horse because the idea of plebiscite had already been killed by Pakistan, Pakistani Prime Minister. Now the question is, why Pakistan was repeatedly rejecting plebiscite under UN's auspices, which was its official position? Why did it do so 3 times? To understand that, we have to look into internal situation in POK. In 1949, Pakistan dismissed Sardar Ibrahim, the first president of POK, and this led to Sudan revolt. Sudans were his tribesmen. They were a martial law. The revolt is spread all over POK, and it lasted almost 10 years. Now, initially, Punjab Constabulary was deployed, and then Pakistan Army was deployed. In 1955, Muslim Conference, which was a leading political organization in that region, submitted a memorandum to Pakistan Constituent Assembly. And in this memorandum, it gave a graphic description. If you could show those slides. The memorandum said there is a campaign of terror going on for past few years. Earlier. Just one more. Go back. Yes, this is. Last few years, people of Azad Kashmir and Poonch especially have been subjected to a great torture and terrorization. Ruthless and random firing by mortar guns took place. Now, mortar is a heavy caliber gun, and it was being used against civilians by Pakistan Army, resulting in many deaths. Next one. And the memorandum went on to describe in graphic detail how the women were raped, not only being raped, but in some cases their breasts and secret parts have been bitten by the police and its officers. Instances of teenage boys being subjected to unnatural vices by platoon so-and-so. Terrorized by this situation, 3,000 people have gone over to the Indian side of the ceasefire line. Now, these are all Muslims, Kashmiri Muslims, who were crossing over to escape military operation by Pakistan Army to the Indian side. Now, if the situation was this bad, obviously Pakistan could not afford a plebiscite because it was not sure of the outcome of the vote, even in the territory under its control. Now, this document was presented to Security Council by Krishn Menon in 1957. Pakistan's Foreign Minister, Sir Zafrullah Khan, a very valuable figure, who was present, did not demur. So obviously, this was correct. This document was circulated thereafter as a UN document. Incidentally, Sudan Revolt finds extensive reference in writings of Muhammad Yusuf Sarraf, also who was a Muslim Conference leader and later became the Chief Justice of POK Supreme Judicial Council. So this is an established fact. Now, this memorandum was circulated as a UN document, which is a public document, and thereafter some power decided to classify it. Why? Because obviously the intent was to save Pakistan's embarrassment, and then it disappeared from public memory. I got, on my request, UN has declassified this, and it is again available on the UN website. So this is the reason why Pakistan rejected plebiscite under UN's auspices, though it claims this to be its official position rhetorically.
But then, sir, the natural follow up anybody would ask is, I mean, then what is the internal governance structure in POK? I mean, कुछ है भी उधर, मतलब हम आज का एक वो हर चीज में आजादी आजादी आ जाती है इनकी, तो फिर काहे की आजादी?
This is a very important question. The Pakistani narrative on Kashmir issue, there are two central themes, Azadi and wishes of the people. Both are absent in governance of the territory under Pakistani control. So while the Indian state of J&K underwent repeated elections starting in 52, and then the constitution was approved in 57, and so on. On the Pakistani side, POK was essentially run on the basis of executive fiats. These are called, the rules of business issued by Ministry of Kashmir Affairs. And essentially a joint secretary in Ministry of Kashmir Affairs, which was located in Rawalpindi, not Karachi. Essentially, the joint secretary ran POK. There's a famous episode which Yusuf Sarraf and others have mentioned, that one of the POK presidents went to meet this joint secretary, and the joint secretary interrupted the conversation. He said there was a call from Karachi, the national capital, and he told the POK president to go and sit in his PA's room. So this was the status of the POK president, that he had to wait in the room of the private assistant of the joint secretary. So these were just statutory positions. Now, Chaudhry Ghulam Abbas, who was a Muslim Conference chairman and a great supporter of Pakistan, he was disqualified from contesting in 1964 elections, which were based on limited franchise basic democracy, which were essentially sham elections devised by Ayub Khan, both for Pakistan as well as POK. And Khurshid, who was a POK president, Khurshid was PA to Jinnah, and Jinnah is God in Pakistan. So his PA also had a very high stature, and he was appointed as POK president. He was arrested in 65. So this is the governance essentially meant direct control by Ministry of Kashmir Affairs. And this brings me, there's a very interesting directive issued by Ghulam Shah Khan. If you can go to the next slide. Now, Ghulam Shah Khan, as cabinet, he's a very famous figure in Pakistan's history. He was cabinet secretary in 1971. Later, he became president of Pakistan and one of the most powerful presidents who dismissed two elected prime ministers, Benazir and Nawaz Sharif, in the 90s. Now, in 71, this is May, he issued this directive, and I'll read out the last sentence. The directive was to Pakistan government departments to deal with Azad Kashmir in the field of its responsibility, should look upon and deal with Azad Kashmir as if it were another administrative unit of the country. So while Pakistan's official position was and remains that this is Azad, here the internal directive said that this should be treated as a part of uh, part of Pakistan.
So they don't even have any consistency in their communication, which is so weird.
And well, the only consistency is that Pakistani control this directive was repeated again in 1988 by somebody else.
Yeah, but then what about the thing that Bhutto said in the Pakistan National Assembly?
Now we come to 71 war, which changed the political landscape. And Bhutto, who had vowed to fight a 1,000-year war against India in the UN debate, 7 months later, he signed Shimla Agreement. And in the debate on Shimla Agreement on 14 July 1972, and this is based on the proceedings of the Pakistan. It was then Constituent Assembly. Later, it became National Assembly, and I got these records from U.S. Library of Congress, for which I'm very grateful. Bhutto said that UN resolutions did not support Pakistan's position on Kashmir. Now, he was making the statement as President of Pakistan. He was a president who knew UN very well. And the statement was made in a very formal setting in the Constituent Assembly. Why did he say so? He explained in his lengthy speech that the UN Security Council resolution of April 1948, as well as UNCIP resolution, he didn't mention UNCIP, he mentioned Security Council resolution. It asked Pakistan to withdraw all its forces, while it asked India to withdraw only bulk of its forces. So this was a differentiation which I had explained earlier, rested on the recognition that India had a de jure position, Pakistan had none. And Bhutto exclaimed it was then and then that you lost the right of self-determination. Now, here again, he was twisting the tail slightly, because no UN resolution on Kashmir has mentioned right of self-determination, which did not exist or which existed very weakly as a legal concept when the Kashmir issue was taken to the United Nations in 1948. 48 coincided with the adoption of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the foundational document of the modern literature of human rights. And that does not mention right of self-determination. So he was essentially admitting that UN resolutions did not support Pakistan's case, but giving it a twist. Now, what is a significant, and this was not one-off statement, he repeated it 15 days later in Karachi. What is the significance? Because soon thereafter, Pakistan buried Shimla Agreement and resurrected UN resolutions. And it says, and its reasoning is that the UN Charter and UN resolutions override bilateral agreements. Now, even conceding Pakistani argument in theory for a minute, as a hypothesis, even then it was by given the account of Pakistan's president itself. UN resolutions did not support Pakistan's position on Kashmir.
तो सर फिर मेरे को एक समझ में नहीं आ रहा then so आपकी ये slide explain करिए. I'm going to bring it up. Then what is this POK interim constitution? Like nothing makes sense. Like if I as I was reading your book, I was trying to join the dots from a Pakistani perspective, and nothing makes sense to me from their side.
So Shimla Agreement was followed by adoption of POK interim constitution in 1974. Now this is a paragraph which is quoted verbatim, definition of state subject. Now let me preface it by two things. Before POK interim constitution was adopted in 74, in 1972, Pakistan Citizenship Act was extended to POK as well as northern area. So people of POK were made Pakistani citizens, not by their will, not through exercise of right of self-determination which Pakistan upholds, not through UN mandated plebiscite. They became Pakistani citizens as a result of Pakistan Citizenship Act passed by Pakistani Parliament. So if they have already become Pakistani citizen, then what is the point of having you know, calling for plebiscite and claiming that POK is azad or separate? Now, let's come to the definition given, and this goes back to a notification by Maharaja's government in 27, defining who the subjects of the Kashmir Riyasat, state subject. Now, this has been amended, as you can see, and I have highlighted in certain parts. State subject means a person for the time being, residing in Azad Jammu and Kashmir or Pakistan. So this has completely done away with the distinction between citizen of Pakistan and a subject of POK, because for the time being means there could be constant influx in and out. You can be sitting in Lahore and be a Pakistani citizen, and then you come to POK and become a state subject. Now, and then it goes on to say, or Pakistan, who is a state subject as defined in late Government of State of Jammu and Kashmir notification, as amended from time to time. Now, Maharaja amended this only once or twice. So, who amended it thereafter, and what does the amendment mean? So, essentially, Pakistan completely did away with any legal distinction between Pakistani citizens and state subjects of POK, and changed the demographic composition.
Rule by proxy.
Now, let me go to the next. Can you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
This is something from POK Constitution. This says that no person or political party shall be permitted to propagate against or take part in activities prejudicial or detrimental to the ideology of the state's accession to Pakistan. So, accession to Pakistan is a predetermined conclusion. Neither accession to India nor independence are choices given to people of the state. So, again, there is no self-determination. Self-determination is equated with predetermination in favor of accession to Pakistan. Now, next slide. Next. This is Bhutto's comment. No, okay. Now let me explain. Can you just move the slide aside for the time being? Let me just explain. Now, POK constitutions all over the world define powers of elected assembly and elected government. POK's constitution defines powers of Pakistan within POK. Now, this is very strange, and this is done. There's Article 31 of POK's interim constitution, which vests all powers, both legislative and executive powers, in a council headed by Pakistani Prime Minister. So what Pakistan did, after adoption of constituent, elected assembly and government came into existence, but Pakistan created a parallel body, a supra-constitutional body outside the framework of POK, which was headed by Pakistani Prime Minister. Pakistani Prime Minister is not a citizen of or subject of POK. And all the powers were vested in this council. It was called Kashmir Council. So this was described as rule by proxy, where Pakistan was essentially running both legislative and executive functions of the POK government. Now, this was much criticized. 30 years later, under 13th Amendment of POK Constitution in 2018, Kashmir Council was relegated to advisory role. But, and mark my words, its powers were not transferred to elected assembly. its powers have now been directly assumed by Pakistan. So Pakistan exercises direct legislative and executive powers over 32 subjects within POK. This is hollowing out POK's autonomy from within. And even on the remaining 22 subjects, Pakistan's consent is needed. Now, the interesting part is that this change took place a year before deletion of Article 370, which was criticized by Pakistan as having, destroyed Kashmir's autonomy. And a year before, Pakistan had legally assumed control over all the critical powers within POK, and this includes powers of taxation, powers over strategic highways and water, the two of the critical sources. Now, let me touch on northern area, which is, as I explained at the beginning of our discussion, is the 85% of the territory. And let me go back a little to the closing years of the first Kashmir War, uh, which started in 47 with tribal invasion. By May 48, Pakistan had committed regular troops. January 49, the two countries agreed on a ceasefire and a formal truce agreement was signed in June 49. Now, the UN report said, after the UNCIP resolution was adopted in August 48, which we have discussed earlier, Pandit Nehru wrote to UN that India wants to station its military garrison in northern area because there was a complete void. Pakistani presence was just limited to Gilgit town. UN did not dispute Indian position, but it said that we'll come to it when the ceasefire goes into effect. Ceasefire went into effect, as I said, 4 months later in January 49. Now, the UN report says that in the autumn of 1948, Pakistan did not have effective control over northern areas. Pakistan government, in a written statement to the United Nations, which is quoted in the UN report, said that it had only one officer in this entire area, northern area, which is 85% of POK. Now, this is the situation till December 48, according to UN records, when Pakistan didn't have an effective control because it had only one officer, and that too only based in Gilgit town. The same report, 20 paras down the line, goes on to say, but by January 49, Pakistan was in effective control. Now, how could it be that a day earlier, that is 31st December 48, Pakistan did not have effective control, and a day later, on 1st January 49, it came into effective control over such a large territory? Now, I have shown in my book that this is simply whitewashing. And mind you, UNCIP did not have presence on the ground. So UNCIP was only going by whatever information was being fed to it by Pakistan, because UNMOGIP, which is the military observer group for India, Pakistan, it came into existence much later. So till it came into existence, UN did not have any independent source of verification of Pakistani claim. Now, UN records show that as late as May 49, Pakistan did not have control because Pakistan, in response to India's repeated requests for stationing its military garrison, asked about the locations where India wants to station its garrison in northern area. So obviously Pakistan didn't have any forces. And then certainly in May, and that is a turning point. It's, it went back. So the UN report itself is a kind of, it raises many questions that, till 48 and Pakistan had no control, and certainly it comes into effective control. So essentially, Pakistan expanded into northern area after ceasefire went into effect. Now, given the strategic importance of northern area, because it borders Afghanistan, it borders Central Asia, and it gave Pakistan contiguity to China. This area has been more tightly controlled than the rest of POK. So while POK or Azad Kashmir got a nominal constitution in 1974, Gilgit-Baltistan northern area remained under direct control of Ministry of Kashmir Affairs. As late as 93, and that slide here, I have mentioned that, POK High Court's judgment where it said that in 93 that detachment of northern areas from the rest of Azad Jammu and Kashmir tantamounts to violation of the resolutions of Security Council of March so and so. Now, this was a huge slap on Pakistan's face because POK High Court itself said that Pakistan had violated Security Council resolution. So Pakistan created a council in name to govern this territory, which was still then directly controlled by Ministry of Kashmir Affairs. This council had only limited municipal powers. So in 1999, people of northern areas went into appeal to Pakistan Supreme Court. Supreme Court in its judgment, which came in May 99, said that it asked Pakistan two things. It asked Pakistan to give people of the territory. Can you go ahead? I think I have the slide. Go ahead. Okay. No. Okay. Let it be. Let it be. So in 19, no, just keep this aside for a minute. So in 1999, Pakistan Supreme Court in a historic judgment asked Pakistan to give people of northern areas judicially enforceable fundamental rights. Second, it said that Pakistan should provide representative institutions within a period of 6 months. Now, what is the implication? The implication is that neither there were fundamental rights till 99, nor any representative government. And the Supreme Court in its judgment said, described powers of the council as akin to functions of municipality. Now, interestingly, this famous judgment came in May 99. What is the significance? May 99, Pakistan had moved its troops into Kargil, ostensibly to liberate Kashmir from what Pakistan describes as Indian occupation. And here, the Pakistan Supreme Court was describing that people on the Pakistani side had no rights. And very interestingly, again, a telling point, Pakistan government in its submission to the Supreme Court, Pakistan government was opposed to Supreme Court, prying into this area which was closely held as military's preserve. So Pakistan said that, this is not part of, you have no jurisdiction. And the wording said Pakistan has been in effective occupation of this territory since 1947. It has used the term occupation in a submission to Pakistan Supreme Court. Now, the last point about this, there is a very interesting judgment. There is also the issue, neither POK nor Northern Area are defined as part of Pakistan under Pakistani Constitution. Article 1 of Pakistan's Constitution, which defines Pakistan's territory, omits both of these. So how come Pakistan's Supreme Court exercises jurisdiction over this territory? Pakistan's Supreme Court solved this legal conundrum in a very innovative manner. The Supreme Court said human rights are universal. So, using universality of the human rights, it established its jurisdiction over a territory which is not part of Pakistan under Pakistani Constitution itself. Now, the judgment itself was still a progressive step forward because it asked for a representative government. It took Pakistan 10 years before it established an elected assembly, which came about in 2009. And this was courtesy Zardari, who was then president of Pakistan. Zardari was a Shia. Northern area, which by now had been renamed as Gilgit-Baltistan, is the only territory under Pakistan's control or any of the Pakistani province where Shias are in a majority. So Zardari had sympathies to this region, so he gave them limited powers under Gilgit-Baltistan order of 2009. They were given powers, elected assembly was created, it was given pass over 61 subjects. Now, 2018, fast forward, a fresh order was issued, Gilgit-Baltistan order of 2018. And under this order, the entire list of 61 subjects on which the elected assembly had been earlier given limited powers was abolished. Now, this led to huge protests in Gilgit-Baltistan, and orders of this order were torn in the presence of Pakistan's acting Prime Minister Shah Hasan Abbasi. He was the acting Prime Minister in between Nawaz Sharif and Imran Khan. In the Gilgit-Baltistan Assembly, the people went to Gilgit-Baltistan Supreme Judicial Court, and the Supreme Judicial Court of the territory, in a historic judgment, set aside the Pakistan government's order of 2018. Now, this was a replay of what happened in 93, where the POK High Court had taken a similarly courageous step. Now, this again was a huge slap on Pakistan's face. Pakistan went and appealed to Pakistan Supreme Court. In 99, it was challenging Supreme Court's jurisdiction over northern area. Now it itself moved to Supreme Court. And Supreme Court sided with Islamabad against the people of northern area or Gilgit-Baltistan, and restored the order of 2018 against which people were agitating. Now, both these major changes, that is, change in the POK constitution where Pakistan assumed direct powers within POK, and Gilgit-Baltistan order of the same year 2018, which has vested all the powers in the person of the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Both these steps took place a year before deletion of Article 370. Now, what is the position of Gilgit-Baltistan? If you go back in history, around the time of First World War, Congo was not simply a Belgian colony, it was a personal state of King Leopold of Belgium. There was no question of any fundamental rights. Now, this is exactly the situation of Gilgit-Baltistan today, because under Gilgit-Baltistan order of 2018, all the legislative as well as executive powers are vested in the person of the Prime Minister of Pakistan. So this tells you where is Azadi and where are the wishes of the people in the governance system which Pakistan has devised for this territory.
Sir, if this is the scenario, then what about all the claims about elections? हम तो लोगों के लिए कर रहे हैं, कौम के लिए कर रहे हैं, कौम के लिए कर रहे हैं, उनके लिए कर रहे हैं. Then where? How does one? I mean, what the hell is like? My brain just gets short circuited when I listen to these things, and then the reality is something else.
As I explained, that for first 26 years of its existence, POK was run on the basis of executive fiats issued by Ministry of Kashmir Affairs Rules of Business. First election under universal franchise took place in POK as well as rest of Pakistan only in 1970, and that brought into existence a certain assembly, a POK president. Now, after Zia's coup of 77, the POK assembly was invited to dissolve itself. This is, a collective suicide done voluntarily, quote unquote. So the assembly dissolved itself, and the POK president thereafter was dismissed by Zia. Now, after that, and Zia had promised that elections both in Pakistan and POK within 10 days or something like that. It took 8 years. So for 8 years, till 74, there was no constitution. Then the constitution came into being, assembly was formed, and then dissolved in 77. Between 77 and 85, no elections, 8 years. And when the elections took place in 85, these were partyless elections. Now, JKL, Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front of Yasin Malik is a prominent member. JKLF there was used as a front to start the campaign of terrorist violence in on the Indian side of line of control in '89, but JKLF has never been allowed to take part in elections on the POK side, because I had shown you that slide, which from the POK constitution, which bars any party or individual to challenge the ideology of accession uh, to Pakistan, and JKLF stands for Independent Pakistan. So it has never been allowed to take part in any election in in uh, in POK. Now thereafter, elections have been held. JKLF has not been allowed. Other parties have taken part. The last elections were in 2021. Now there are again a few very interesting parts. Elections are meaningless because the elected assemblies have no powers. As I have explained earlier, that the powers over taxation, over road, over water, all the entire set of powers were first vested in Kashmir Council and now have been taken over by Pakistan government directly. So elections produce an assembly and a government which have no powers. Second is that elections have always resulted in bringing to power the government which is there in Islamabad. Now, this happy coincidence is a result of uh, very, an artificial structuring. That is, of the 53 seats in POK Assembly, 12 are, these are called, these are seats distributed all over Pakistan. So this is more than 12 out of 53 means more than 20%. Now these seats are essentially decided. They are in the gift of Pakistan's Prime Minister or Chief Minister of that state, because there are very few people, Kashmiris, out in these in areas outside POK. So this system has been used to create a permanent leverage in favor of Islamabad to bring to power the party it wants. And it has created such anomalies that in one of the elections, MQM, which is a party of the Muhajirs based in Karachi, won 2 seats in POK Assembly. Now the very recently, this is sometime after Imran Khan's government fell. This is um, this is last year, summer last year. There was a change in POK. Now this time it was done with a lot of finesse. The party remained the same. The party, which had won the last election when Imran Khan was in power, that was PTI. PTI has 33 out of 53 seats. Now, if party has such a comfortable position, why have the change in leadership? Even more interesting part. The change was brought about as a result of vote of no confidence. Now, vote of no confidence is a perfectly legitimate device in any democracy to change government. But here the party was not being changed. The vote of no confidence was moved not by opposition, but by the ruling party. And the opposition, the entire opposition, that is both PML and as well as PPP, boycotted. So this was a device, a legal device used to engineer an in-party change at the behest of powers that be. Now, this is there's again something very interesting. According to the last census, there are 30,000 Kashmiris in POK. These are people who have come from the Kashmir Valley. The number of refugees, that is both Kashmiris and people from Jammu, is something like 3,64,000. The population of POK is about 3 million. So what does it tell you? And people from
So the
Jammu
बाकी के
area.
लोग कौन है फिर?
वो तो आप समझ लीजिए वो कहाँ से आए हैं. वो तो,
पंजाबी है
you know,
सारे.
you can look at the some of the YouTube recordings. You know, people in the POK assembly in Gilgit Baltistan, they are dark complexion people. Now, who has heard of or seen a dark complexion Kashmiri? But let me complete. So, according to official census, there are only 30,000 Kashmiris, which is less than 1% of the population of POK. So, though Pakistan has appropriated Kashmir cause, there are hardly any Kashmiris in POK. Most of these people were from Jammu region, or rather Punch region, and most of them were displaced by 67 with the construction of uh, Mangla Dam. So there has been complete change of demographic composition of that territory.
So one last point, because I know you also have a slide on it, but I actually wanted to talk about this. Okay, this is the United UK statement. So what has been the role of the West in general when it comes to quote unquote wishes of the people?
You know, let me make a distinction. In the early phase of debate in the Security Council, US supported Indian position, and the American representative said in debate in the Security Council that the legality of J&K's accession to India is beyond doubt. It was the British who cleared the pitch against India because Pakistan was essentially a British creation, and it was demand for plebiscite was inserted in was not part of the instrument of accession signed by Maharaja. It was a letter written by Mountbatten, and this there was a consistency in this stand. This was not limited to only Mountbatten's action, and Mountbatten could not have acted on his own. This was also reflected in UK's position in the Security Council. So UK has strenuously supported plebiscite in J&K. When it came to UK's territorial interests in Cyprus, which was a British colony about, say, 800 or 1,000 kilometers away from British mainland, UK took the reverse position. It said that, right of self-determination cannot be applied to any territory of a member state because this was clearly an internal matter for that state itself. Any infringement by the United Nations of that fundamental principle, that is, interference by UN in the internal matter, would be regarded by the United Kingdom government as ultra vires and completely unacceptable. So, when it came to its own territorial interests, its position changed completely.
I mean, the hypocrisy of the British side is mind blowing. Now, before we wrap things up, Ambassador Dinkar, I do wanted to talk about this whole Indus Water Treaty. You have touched upon the natural resources and the overall development of that area in some detail in the book, in parts in the book. So, can you also talk about this?
Uh, Indus Water Treaty has no parallel in world history. It gave Pakistan 80% of the waters. There is no precedent where the upper riparian has conceded 80% of the waters to the lower riparian, and that too where India has had 7 times the population of Pakistan. Now, Pakistan used this and built a dam, Mangla Dam, on Jhelum River, which was completed in 67 for 36 years, and started using both the water as well as the hydropower. For 36 years, people of POK were given no compensation for their water or electricity from a dam which had caused massive displacement. It had, in fact, changed the demographic composition. The so called Meerpuris are essentially people who were displaced from this area and now are safely ensconced in UK, and they raise Kashmir cause and Kashmir slogan there. The population here has changed. But the POK was not given any compensation. When the compensation was started sometime in 2003, POK was given 15 paisa per unit, while Pakistan's provinces are given 1 rupee 10 paisa, that is 7 times more. What is the reason how for this discrimination? Pakistan's claim is that 1 rupee 10 paisa is the hydropower royalty, and that can only be given under Article 161 of Pakistani Constitution to Pakistan's provinces. And Pakistan, being a good citizen of the world, has not made POK a constitution of Pakistan. It is an Azad territory. So how can it give POK hydropower royalty? Now the catch here is that Pakistan's constitution was adopted in 1973, 6 years after Mangla Dam was constructed in 67. So there was enough time for Pakistan to reflect it in the constitution when it was being debated. Assuming that this was a omission, since then there have been 26 amendments of Pakistani constitution. Everything else has been changed except this part. So obviously this is not an omission. Now the third part is that in international law, suppose we buy French cheese or buy machinery from US or buy something from China, France, China, or US are not part of Indian territorial jurisdiction, but we make payment for it, for goods and services which you buy from outside your legal jurisdiction. So even if POK is not part of Pakistan, Pakistan should give it a fair remuneration. And the last thing is that POK's distinct status did not come in the way of exploiting its resources. It was the issue was raised only when it came to paying for it.
All right. So I
Let
had a
me,
couple of, yeah, sure. Go ahead. Go
no,
ahead.
I just wanted to touch on CPEC, why this is a very important part.
Yeah,
I
please,
think that,
please go ahead.
you know, the Pakistan was conceived as a unitary state in 2010 under Zardari. It underwent a major change with the 18th Amendment of Pakistani Constitution, which devolved more powers on Pakistan's provinces. And the reason was, again, Zardari, because he was a Sindhi and he wanted a little more political space for his state, so his province, so he gave them more provincial autonomy and transferred more resources. In case of POK and northern area, the control has been tightened. I have explained, the 13th Amendment of POK Constitution and the Gilgit-Baltistan Order of 2018, why this complete change, movement in reverse direction, because sometime between 2010 and 2018, CPEC was declared, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Now, CPEC has brought Pakistan both financial bounty as well as military support in terms of Chinese presence in Gwadar. So the importance of this region, and CPEC enters Pakistan through northern area, which is called Gilgit-Baltistan. So this is the reason why Pakistan military tightened its control over this territory, while Islamabad's centralized control was relaxed in rest of Pakistan. Now, this under CPEC, they have Pakistan has received, there are big figures touted, 46 billion and so on. Actually, according to World Bank figures, only 23 billion have been received. Of the 23 billion, the bulk has gone into POK and Gilgit-Baltistan, and this is something which India has to take cognizance of. Gwadar, which has been in media gaze, has received a small part, $900 million. POK has got $5 billion. Northern area will get about $12 billion. Bhasa Dam, which is going to be a massive 4,000 megawatt hydroelectric power project, for which MOU has been signed with Chinese government, will get $12 billion of Chinese credit. And this MOU has been signed, and despite the catastrophe, the climate challenge last year, where Pakistan underwent floods, this project has been retained. And during Shahbaz Sharif's visit to Beijing, after he became Prime Minister in October 2022. The joint statement reiterated that Bhasa Dam will go ahead. So about two-thirds, that is roughly 16 to 17 billion dollar of 23 billion committed under CPEC, is going into northern area and POK. So obviously China is trying to tighten its grip on India's east Ladakh. It has already established presence, and we know the rest of it. Also tightening its presence on the western side.
So actually, my question was about China, and how much should our nation be worried about this whole Chinese interference?
The Chinese are unlike the Americans. The Americans were generous, and you have seen the result that despite $20 billion or more of American assistance, what Pakistan did to US when Kabul fell. But the Chinese are a different kettle of fish. So if they have put their money down, they want returns. And they have built this into a very curious structure. That is, money does not flow. Most of the money, 23 billion, there's a very small tranche, about a couple of $1 billion, which have been given to Pakistan government on concessional terms for infrastructure development. And so-called infrastructure development is again taking place in northern area, highways, optical fiber line, which again will serve Pakistan, China's strategic interests. China is worried about the Malacca dilemma, and apart from disruption in shipping, it's worried about disruption of the internet traffic. So internet cable lands in Pakistan, and the transition will be through Pakistan, northern area into China. So this is this infrastructure part for which 2 or 3 billion have been given by China. Most of the Chinese money is being given to Chinese companies, not even to Pakistani companies. These are, the uh, credit given to Chinese companies executing projects in Pakistan. And China has also got sovereign guarantee from Pakistan that 17% return in dollar terms for Chinese investment under CPEC. Now, this is very funny. Money is being given to private sector, and that too not to the country's private sector, but to Chinese companies. But the borrower's obligation has been assumed by Pakistan government. Normally, sovereign guarantee anywhere, for instance, India has taken money from World Bank and so on in the past. So sovereign guarantee was given by Indian government for projects where money came to government projects. Yes, China has extracted Pakistan's sovereign guarantee for money being given to Chinese companies. So there's a double jeopardy for Pakistan. They have guaranteed 17% return on investment in dollar terms, and Pakistani currency is sinking. So that means the debt obligation goes up. And regardless of the outcome of the project, money will have to be shelled out by Pakistan government. So this has very major implications. And of course, now China has started demanding posting of its own guards. So in places like Gwadar, the first ring of security to Chinese are provided by Chinese guards, and there are reports that similar thing has been done in northern area. So they are putting boots on the ground also.
So one last question before I wrap it up. Now, considering that you shared that there are barely any actual POK residents over there, and it has been completely taken over by people who are, where we all know where they are from, and the resources are taken over, everything is pretty much taken over in that sense, then what about the general interest of the people? And so like, so I guess that this whole idea of plebiscites and taking care of things, but beyond that, how does India, because obviously India says that is their property, their land, their region, whatever word we want to use in the eyes of the law, but how does how would India reach out to those people who are the minuscule minority, who are the actual people of that area?
That, it is something which the people of that region have to raise this issue, and they have raised it, but they have been suppressed. Amanullah Khan, the founder of JKLF, we discussed that earlier, has given. He is dead now, but he had given a series of interviews to Human Rights Watch, a human rights NGO based in New York, and in which he had graphically described how the people are suppressed. And he said, please don't leave us. So this is not simply India's responsibility, it's for the entire international community to see that the people of this region get a fair deal. And of course, the people of the region also have to understand what Pakistan is. Uh, there are problems of nationalities in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, in Sindh, Muhajirs, and Baloch. And Baloch are the smallest nationality. They are about 5%, but they have undergone about 5 or 6 military operations. The population of POK is even smaller than the Baloch population. So, the Pakistani control is even tighter. So it's a very dire situation for them, but it's for the entire international community to take note of the situation.
Fair enough, sir. Sir, before we wrap it up, Abhi, if you don't mind me asking, next project क्या है? कौन सी किताब आने वाली है आपकी?
I'm writing a book. I'm not chosen the title, but it's essentially on ideologies of Pakistan. It covers the entire, period from Jinnah to Imran Khan. And it brings out, touches on some of the important milestones like Jinnah's speech of 11th August 48, which is held by liberals in Pakistan as the golden standard from which Pakistan has deviated. And I have analyzed that speech in terms of a dissenter, in terms of his Wali Khan, in terms of establishment figure Justice Munir, and in terms of what a religious leader like Maududi says. It also touches on some other milestones like objectives resolution, which essentially circumscribed the powers of the elected legislature and established the supremacy of the divine. This was the biggest step towards making Pakistan an Islamic state. And this objectives resolution was brought into Pakistan's constitution by Bhutto and given overriding authority over fundamental rights by Zia. And though the civilian parties after Zia's demise have repealed many of his other, other legislation which have a bearing on the on democratic functioning of government, they have not touched this part. They have not touched on the what Zia did in terms of Islamization of Pakistan. So there's a political consensus. So my next book will be touching on some of these aspects which are normally lost in description of the usual trajectory from Ayub to Bhutto to Zia and so on, which is this history of the rulers. But what are the underlying motives and ideologies which have a consistency? And that consistency is remarkable, that even when there was no constitution, the ideology has guided and Pakistan, and that ideology has remained a consistent factor, whether it was a military rule or civilian.
Fair enough. So, Ambassador Srivastava, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed reading your book. In fact, I loved the ending जहाँ पे आपने फैज अहमद फैज की पोइट्री से एंड किया किताब को. I thoroughly enjoyed this. So once again, thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to reading your next book too.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
All right, guys, we'll wrap today's discussion up. Once again, before we wrap it up, in the description of the podcast, there'll be a link to buy the book. So go to the link, click it, and buy the book. This is a very important book. Every Indian should read. You will get a lot of arguments, especially if you're outside India. Outside India वाले हमेशा बोलते हैं हमको किताबें बताओ जिससे हम वहाँ पे डाइनिंग रूम में बैठ के अपने पाकिस्तानी दोस्तों के साथ आर्ग्यूमेंट कर सके. मैंने बोला फिर ठीक है, ये किताब ले लो, उनसे आर्ग्यूमेंट करनी है तो. And as far as I'm concerned, you know the drill. Please like this video, leave your comments in the comment section, subscribe to the Cārvāka podcast. If you're an audio only listener, please leave your review on iTunes or a rating on Spotify, and buy the podcast merchandise. And if possible, become a member on YouTube, Patreon, Fanmo, wherever you are. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, namaste. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you.